Hello, everyone. So we are picking up lecture 3 of lesson 35 and the story of Trajan's military expansions. And where I want to begin now is to look in the city of Rome, where a major construction took place under Trajan's reign, which is that Trajan himself created a forum known as the Forum of Trajan. The building structure began around 107, and we expect that it was done 112, maybe 113. Now, we have already observed that a number of Roman emperors have created their own forum. For example, here is the Forum of Julius Caesar. You recall the Temple of Venus. Here is the Forum of Augustus with the Temple of Mars the Avenger. Here is the Forum of Nerva, which was began under Domitian, but Nerva completed it. Here is a Forum Pacis, the Forum of Peace under Vespasian. But I think this is also a very useful image because it shows us the scale, just how large the Forum of Trajan was. Also, importantly, he not only built the forum itself, but also a number of other structures around this area here is known as the Markets of Trajan, which was a sort of high-end shopping area. Obviously, he's trying to get people to come to that place and sort of be there and participate. Now, if we this is the markets. And number 2 on this drawing. Now, if we look at this forum, it sort of has some space that's very similar to some of the other fora. There is a big wide open space on which in the middle there is an equestrian statue of Trajan that he's on a horse. Here in the middle, number 3, we have a large basilica. So this is now offering indoor space for various legal cases. Number 4, 2 buildings of libraries, one Greek, one Latin. And then number 6 here is another open square onto which Trajan had a temple built. But probably the most interesting and important structure is number 5, which is Trajan's column. So Trajan ended up building a ginormous column, right? Here is the size of a human, just for a comparison, the base of which functioned also as the place where he wanted to be buried. So this forum ends up also functioning, as you recall, Augustus built a mausoleum for himself that was used by some of his later family members as well. So what Trajan chooses to build is a column, and I think it's sort of a major victory monument on the top of which he put his own image. And we are lucky enough that if you visit Rome today, I just really love this image. This is what it would be the major road from which you would approach this area. In the background here is a Mussolini monument, which the Italians describe casually as the typewriter, just because it looks a little bit like that. But so here's the average size person, and here is the column as it still survives. The statue on top has been changed to a saint, but nevertheless, the column itself is there, right? And so that's the super interesting part, is that we can see what Trajan wanted Romans to see in terms of military representation. And that is because Trajan's column all around here essentially is a huge comic strip going around, depicting, as this slide shows you, more than 2,500 figures, including Trajan more than 50 times. And it tells the story of Trajan's Dacian Wars, those 2 Dacian Wars, which led to the development of the province of Dacia. And one of the questions that has been on people's mind for the longest time when trying to look at this column is that, of course, if you stand here, down on the ground, right? This is the size of a human right here. This is pretty hard to see, okay? Like, I've been there in Rome a number of times, and, people bring binoculars to try to see this better. So one thing that is different now is that, of course, in the ancient world, this was all colored, right? So that would have made it easier to see. And maybe our desire to read it as a comic strip was followed less by the Romans, who instead probably just stood on one side or the other side and looked up and tried to see it, or maybe from the galleries of the libraries, there was some view of certain areas. So in terms of what we see from the Dacian Wars, here's a nice breakdown on activity. By the way, this image and quite a few of the following images come from a beautiful National Geographic representation of the Trajan's column, and then also a discussion about how it survives today, and various reconstruction work and various interpretation work. If you have time, I highly recommend it. So we get a lot about sort of marching and battles, and but also not just sort of those most important aspects of fighting, but also construction, negotiation, sacrifice, Trajan giving a speech. So there's a lot of stuff happening on these. This is a really rich sort of narrative with over 150 scenes. So let us take a quick look at what kind of scenes we are seeing here. What does this actually look like? So here we are. This is relatively low on the column. So this is the beginning of the first Dacian War. And what we see here is that this is a river god, and this is a river. You can kind of see the waves here. Is that the Roman soldiers are marching across essentially what is a pontoon bridge, right? When you put lots of boats next to each other and thereby you create a bridge. And so there they are marching into Dacia. So this is really the beginning of the war, and we know that in fact, you know, the Romans had to get through the Danube to get to the fighting. Now let's continue our story. So on this image right here, Trajan receives a message from the Dacians telling him that he should turn back. Of course, he will not turn back, but instead the war will begin by the Romans partially establishing a military camp, beautifully depicted here, by the way. Here is Trajan giving a speech, and here is the military camp. You can see how they have their little tents in there and all the signage. And so they are getting ready for the actual fighting, which occurs on this scene numbered 24, which is showing us the fighting. You can see people down. You can see sort of really conflict enacted, including Trajan, again represented, being offered some heads of Dacians who have been obviously killed. And brutal as this image is, I think it's an excellent close-up to observe one other aspect of representation, in addition to, of course, Trajan himself with his typical haircut and facial features. And what it is that here are your Roman soldiers, you know, usually with standard outfits, although as the National Geographic actually beautifully describes how they simplified some of the soldiers' usual outfits, so you could see that well. Now, notice these are the Roman soldiers in their standard outfits. All the barbarians have beards, okay? So that's one thing that is a good and easy way for us to be able to tell them apart in these conflicts. Okay, now, of course, as the fighting continues on, Trajan has to encourage his troops. And so we see the Roman emperor here standing in front of his soldiers and talking to them. And I think, see, all the faces are sort of looking at him. And it gives us an idea of the emperor really there in the action of the fighting. And then at the end of the First Dacian War, we see this sort of very powerful victory scene, which is showing us Trajan seated at this time, right? He doesn't need to stand anymore. He's not in action mode. We have won, and this is done. And you can see a number of figures sort of bending down, maybe kneeling, and reaching out in their hands, sort of begging the emperor. And so essentially this is a surrender scene in which the Dacians are shown as giving up at the end of the First Dacian War in 102. And then the story of the two wars is separated by this image, would be the goddess Victory, who rides on a shield the amazing victory that has taken place. And of course, we do know that Trajan at that point returned to Rome and had a triumphal celebration. So there was obviously a lot of stuff that they brought back with themselves. And what we see here also is that the surrender included that the Dacians had to destroy some of their own fortifications, and some people are seeming to be fleeing. So I think it's interesting. It really gives us some sense of what aspects of war we might see, and it's something to think about when today in America we think about our wars. What do we want to see of those wars? What is that like? Some of the other imagery that we also encounter is sort of religious imagery. Again, remember that in Rome, victory and sacrifice are not oppositional, but you sacrifice, and that's part of how you will achieve the victory. The gods are part of the story. And in this image, we see Trajan performing a sacrifice, and behind him, we see that now there is a bridge on the Danube to cross. In this close-up, you can see it even better. So he's doing a libation, somebody's playing music, which is how it's supposed to go. And here's the bridge in the background, right? So we can see sort of the evolution of the story. We see sometimes activities in addition, again, to battles, sort of work, right, where they are constructing a fort. Again, we will see soon Trajan with the soldiers. And in what we might find sort of this more disturbing, we see a Roman soldier here who is loading what is a pack animal with some stuff, right? And this is often interpreted as Dacian treasure. And we know that actually when they went in, they were looking for gold and silver, and supposedly the Dacian king Decebalus had some large golden treasures that were never found. And people fantasize that for the past 1800 years. But definitely there was still stuff to take home, even without those particular supposedly amazing golden treasures. And so the Romans pack the stuff up and take it home. Then in this scene, the Roman forces are in pursuit of the defeated Dacians, and we see Decebalus, this king of the Dacians, committing suicide because he doesn't want to be captured and displayed in the triumphal march. Here is in close-up, and I think there is violence. There is comfort with the depiction of violence here. That is, some way for the Romans to bring it home. And so in this final scene, we see that the head of Decebalus is presented to the Roman troops. Again, that level of violence presented in Rome. So to think about this, the question remains, what do the Romans imagine war is like at this point, when many people in Italy are not participating in the fighting anymore? It's done by professional soldiers on the edges of the empire. And in many ways, I think about Trajan's column as a way to try to bring it home, right? Let's show people what fighting is like, how successful we are, how involved the emperor is in the conflict, right? And I think that to some extent, we could even say that the simplifications of various imagery, so that they are able to depict more fighters. For example, they cut away and make things look a little different, but it's all trying to bring home. It's maybe not veracity, but it's something about fighting that is so important, and the success is so important. And in fact, by declaring Dacia a province and making them pay taxes, in fact, that was a huge benefit for Italy, And it seemed to, one last time, to deliver this message that the Romans are awesome fighters and that they are very easily successful in the two Dacian wars. And one outcome of this is that Trajan ends up going down in Roman history as one of the greatest emperors of all time, which I think tells us as much about Trajan's rule as it tells us about the fantasy that the Romans have of themselves as sort of still a military might in the ancient world, even though pretty much the history after Trajan will show that, you know, they are by far not always successful. But what it will leave us with is this particular appellation, particular name that Trajan will get, that he will get the name the best. And I think what is so interesting about it is that people started to call him best sort of early on. But this became one of his official titles as he would progress in his rule. And of course, that Bast, Optimus, was also the name given to Jupiter, the god Jupiter, the most important god in ancient Rome. So one more time, it sort of also enhances to us this sort of superhuman quality associated with the emperors. So the final word to leave you with is that after Trajan died, actually on his way back from those from that eastern fighting against the Parthians, there was a ritual acclamation in the Senate that many other emperors received, and it said, "May you be luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan." And so it really gives us a sense how Trajan was in the Roman imaginary world the best emperor they have ever had, maybe comparable to Augustus, but that's a pretty short list that he has made. Military victory was still part of Roman identity, even at a point when the empire in the 2nd century was very peaceful and most people never saw a battle in their life, or maybe only on the con of Trajan. Thank you.